A woman's hidden secret will change their lives forever. A battle rising from the darkness begins. In this story, every moment is a fight with death. We're just a few steps away from reaching 1,500 subscribers, and we'd be honored to have you with us. Thank you to every kind soul who's joined us so far. With your support, we share peaceful, heartfelt stories that warm the soul. If you enjoy calm, meaningful stories, don't forget to subscribe. You're part of this family now. Now, make yourself comfortable. It's time for the story. Winter had covered the town with a white blanket. The silence felt almost tangible. The trees raised their frozen branches stiffly against the wind, and the sharp breath of the cold air burned the lungs. Jack Morgan was walking slowly on the frozen path deep in the forest where he lived. His hands were tightly tucked into thick leather gloves, and the wind had reddened his face. He was a man shaped by years of loneliness. His beard was rough, and his eyes were cold, sharp, and dull. They carried a settled sadness. For him, the world didn't make sense through spoken words, but through the broken sound of falling wood. That morning, while he was in the forest choosing new trees to cut, the sound of an argument slowed him down. In the small town square, a sharp woman's voice mixed with alcohol and pain echoed. Julia was there, in the crowd, her clothes torn and a pale shawl over her shoulders. Her belly was clearly showing. The woman standing next to her, who he thought was her mother, spoke as if throwing a bag to the ground. "I don't want this girl. She's a shame on me. I can't keep her in my house." The men gathered around were throwing insulting words, staring at the young girl. For the first time, Jack was witnessing someone's pain so closely. For years, he had hidden in the forest, staying as far away from the world of people as possible. But at that moment, a voice inside him whispered that he had to protect this strange, broken girl. Without hesitation, he walked over to the woman and stomped firmly on the ground with his muddy boots. "What's the price?" he asked, his voice deep and sharp. The woman was surprised at first, then laughed mockingly. 3 sacks of straw or 2 weeks' worth of firewood." Jack took out his money and silently handed over the bag. The young girl looked at him. Her eyes were full of surprise and fear. She paused for a second, then quietly followed the man. When they reached the edge of the forest, Jack's small wooden cabin appeared. His shelter, where he had been hiding for years, was covered in snow and silent. When they went inside, warmth spread slightly. Smoke rising from the old stove danced like sparks in the dark room. The girl moved to a corner and slowly started eating the soup Jack had prepared without moving. Her eyes were like 2 small stars shining in the dark. The fears and pain she hid inside were deep. Jack watched her but didn't say a word. The weight of their pasts had condemned them both to silence. As days passed, the young girl slowly started to change. She no longer cried, and, even in her silence, brought a little light into Jack's life. But the town didn't accept this new situation. Whispers, looks, and secret gossip spread from ear to ear. Julia's mother often returned to town, got involved in mysterious deals, and sometimes even made threats. The silent bond between Jack and the girl grew stronger. As both tried to escape their pasts, an unknown danger began knocking at their door. One night, when footsteps approached the door, Jack's heart started beating fast. The snow and the quiet of the night felt like a grim sign of the coming danger. Outside, the shadows waiting in the cold were the first signs of a fate that would change the 2 lives hiding in this small shelter forever. In the darkness of the night, the footsteps outside the door suddenly changed the air inside the cabin. Jack froze. A rare anxiety wrapped around him, something he seldom felt through years of loneliness and hardness. His eyes focused on the dark figures appearing at the door. 3 men were walking with heavy steps, their thick coats and weapons telling how close the danger was. One of them was a tall, thin-faced federal agent with a stern expression. Another was the local sheriff, looking at Jack with tough, experienced eyes. The third man was unknown, but his dark coat and firm walk reflected the tangible threat. Jack took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the cold air. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice sharp and controlled. The sheriff crossed his arms. "We know Julia is here," he said, "and you're protecting her. But this doesn't end here, Morgan." Jack remembered an old photo squeezed in his palm. That photo was the last trace from his past. "I'm protecting her," he answered. "Her right is here. It's not the law but conscience that decides here." The federal agent frowned. Breaking the law won't save you. The girl is a criminal. You're helping a criminal. A criminal? Jack's eyes flashed with anger. What kind of thing is it to brand a woman a criminal and sell her? You didn't come to save her. You came to judge. These words raised the tension. The men reached for their guns. At that moment, Jack thought Julia was still sleeping inside the cabin. Her safety was the most important thing. He quietly stepped back behind the door, raised his hand, but it was alert, as if the reflexes learned from years of survival were in his mind. He made a plan inside his head. He would never surrender. As the men outside watched Jack's movements, suddenly a scream rose from the cabin. Julia had woken up, grabbing her gun with fear and panic. "Don't come in here," she shouted. The gun barrel was pointed outside, into the dark, but her courage and determination were as mysterious as the secret she carried inside. Jack stepped behind her. "Stay calm," he said in a low voice. "I have to get us out of here." The men hesitated for a few seconds. Then the sheriff raised his hand. "We'll talk. This will end here." But Jack knew this was only the beginning. Inside, the lines on Julia's face carried the marks of fear, but also the heavy responsibilities and resentments life had placed on her. A young woman sold by her mother, facing death up close. But she was not just a victim. The baby growing inside her and her belief in it made her strong. Jack's silent support was her reason to survive. Before dawn, when the men left, two strangers inside the cabin had promised to protect each other's lives. Jack looked at an old, rusty pistol on the wooden table, along with the storm inside him. Julia sat beside him, tired and worried. "Why did you save me?" she whispered. Jack looked at her. "Because no one should be this alone. Because you needed someone to carry the burden on your back. And maybe I found a purpose I'd been waiting for all my life." Outside, the snow had started falling again. Life in the forest continued cold and silent. But that night, the fate of two people was about to face the dark shadows of their past. Secrets, lies, and one more deadly secret were about to come to light. This small cabin stood on the edge of salvation and destruction. Julia's eyes were lost in the distance, flickering in the firelight. The ghosts of the past had quietly crept into the cabin, wandering through her mind like nightmares. Her mother's cruel decision clung to her life like a curse. From a young age, she had met the cold touch of betrayal instead of love. She had been sold. Not only herself, but the life growing inside her had been taken hostage too. Remembering those days, her lips trembled. "They sold me," she said in a soft but broken voice. "My mother and that man. I will never forget them." Jack listened without interrupting. His own life was full of wounds, a lost family, the bitter face of war, losses, and regrets. Two broken souls had come together by a strange twist of fate. Jack got lost in Julia's eyes. "This is your refuge now," he said. "No one can hurt you here." But the world outside was not silent. At the first light of morning, activity began around the cabin. When Jack looked out carefully, he saw shadows tracking through the trees. The sheriff and his men had returned, larger in number and more determined. This time, they had hunters, bounty hunters with them burning with anger and greed, like the deadly winter winds. Jack pulled Julia inside quickly and locked the door tight. "We need to get ready," he said. "We're fighting here. Tonight, it's either them or us." Julia looked at him. For the first time, there was more anger than fear in her eyes. "They'll come," she said. "But this time, they'll never take me away." That night, there was no silence in the cabin. Every sound, every crackle was a sign of the enemy. Jack prepared his guns, cocked an old hunting rifle. Julia tried to remember the defense moves she had once learned. She was no longer a victim, she was a fighter. The shadows of the past would not leave them alone in this dark forest. The fight for Jack, Julia, and the unborn baby was not just a battle for survival. It was a dance on the edge of revenge, justice, and hope. Movement began at the door. The hunters approached silently. Inside, breaths were held, time slowed. After a moment of silence, the attack began. The outer door shook from the blows, then gunshots rang out. Jack fired back, while Julia searched for a place to take cover. Fear and courage danced together. The man, strengthened by years of loneliness, was now fighting his real war. Inside, a new life. Outside, the cold breath of death. With every clash, the heartbeat of the baby growing inside Julia symbolized life's resistance. This little life was hope and the future. Jack slowly but steadily pushed the enemies back. But he knew this was just the first round. When the fighting ended, the cabin was quiet. The sky was gray and heavy with clouds. Outside were bloodstains and tracks, but inside, a new hope was born. Julia looked at Jack. "They will find us," she said. "But now, I will fight too." Jack nodded. "We'll win together." And so, deep in the dark forest, two broken souls swore to keep fighting for survival and love. The future was uncertain. Dangers were at their door every moment. But now, they were no longer alone. That night, the silence outside the cabin was like the calm before a storm. Jack and Julia looked at each other with trust in the flickering firelight, both wondering the same thing. What's the next move? Inside Julia, she was caught between her baby's fight to live and the dark shadows of her past. Running away wasn't enough anymore. It was time to fight. At the first light of dawn, Jack stepped outside. He moved carefully through the snowy, silent forest. Every movement in the bushes, every breeze kept him alert. The long years of loneliness had given him a kind of sensitivity. Now Julia was with him, someone he had to protect, and that responsibility weighed heavily on his shoulders. He decided to leave the village and visit an old friend. This man, Michael, had fought alongside him in the past war. They both carried the same silence, but Michael's hands still bore the marks of battle. Jack explained Julia's situation and said he needed help to keep both her and the baby safe. Michael listened quietly and finally said, "This is more complicated than you think. The men are after more than just money." It was said that the man Julia was running from was powerful and ruthless. He had connections to the black market outside the village and used every chance for his own gain, without mercy. Capturing Jack and Julia wasn't just about control, it was a symbol of power. Jack and Michael began planning how to keep Julia safe. But plans might not go as expected. The baby growing inside Julia was both her greatest strength and her biggest weakness. Her health was more important than anything to everyone. Meanwhile, Julia sat quietly inside the cabin, tracing the marks of old wounds in her mind. She thought about her mother's betrayal and her brother's broken soul. Why did they leave me? She wondered quietly. But this time, she wasn't alone. Beside her was a man who had sworn to protect her. Later that night, a shadow appeared around the cabin. Jack grabbed his gun, ready. But it wasn't the enemy they expected, it was Michael. He carried a bag with him. No one knew what was inside, but his face was serious. "Time is short," Michael said. "There are others who want to help you. But first, Julia, you need to face your past." Julia looked at him with surprise and fear. What Michael told her shook her deeply. The man she was running from had ruined not only her life, but many others as well. He was at the center of a dark web woven from his own past, and Julia had become an unintended thread in that web. With Michael's help, Jack and Julia began to make an escape plan. But at every step, the enemy's eyes were on them, ready to use any means to find them. They had to choose carefully who they could trust. In the stillness of the night, the wind outside the cabin mixed with footsteps coming from afar. This was only the beginning. The fight inside was nothing compared to the danger outside. The life growing inside Julia and Jack's courage were their only hopes against the darkness ahead. Inside the cabin, in the pitch-black night, it was cold and silent, but the tension was thick in the air. Between Jack, Michael, and Julia, it felt less like a refuge and more like a battlefield. The baby growing inside Julia was like a light of hope, while the dark forces outside were creeping closer, ready to tear them apart and drag them back into their old loneliness. Jack carefully considered the news Michael had brought. The man chasing Julia wasn't just a criminal. He was a ruthless, feared figure with dark connections strong enough to shift the local power balance. Facing him meant entering not only a physical battle, but a psychological war. But running away was no longer an option. Time had run out. "They have more men in the village," Michael said quietly, his eyes tired but sharp. "And here we are alone. If they attack, we need to be ready." Jack nodded. "What do we need for defense?" he asked. Michael pulled a few old but reliable guns from his bag. "These aren't enough. We need more help, but we don't know who to trust. So we must move carefully." Julia sat quietly nearby, growing more worried with every word. The life inside her was growing stronger each day, but the darkness outside was growing too. Then, there was a knock on the cabin door. Jack grabbed his gun and went to answer. When the door opened, an unexpected face stood there, Emily, Julia's childhood friend, who had been away from the village for a long time and was rumored to have connections with dangerous men. Julia's face froze. "Emily," she said, voice breaking. Emily stepped inside, her expression complicated. "I want you to believe me," she said. "You can't stay here. Things are worse than you think. His men will destroy not just you, but everyone." Jack stepped between them. "Why are you here? No one can be trusted anymore." Emily's eyes shone. "Because I have no one else to talk to. Julia, I want you to run, but I'll stay with you." This unexpected visit only raised the group's tension. Inside Julia, a storm was brewing, and the news from her old friend confirmed her fears. Now they had to protect not only themselves but the new life growing inside her. The next day, Jack and Michael secretly went to an old mine near the village. There, they searched for supplies to increase their weapons and ammunition. Julia and Emily stayed inside the cabin, watching the situation. Julia struggled to stay calm. The weight of the ever-present danger pressed heavily on her shoulders. In the dark tunnels of the mine, Jack and Michael soon found signs. Their enemies' trackers had set up camp nearby. Jack said, "They're watching us, but we'll be the first to see them." As night deepened, activity increased around the cabin. Julia quietly closed herself in her room, trying to feel the movements of her baby. She was caught between the strength inside her and the threats outside. Emily stood guard by the door, struggling with her past and loyalty. That night, the enemies launched their first attack. Gunfire shattered the forest silence. Jack, Michael, and Emily quickly responded. Julia trembled in the cabin, praying through the hardest moment of her life. This fight was not just a physical battle. It was a struggle woven with ghosts of the past, lost hopes, and uncertain futures. But no matter what, Julia no longer wanted to run. She had accepted her life, the life of her baby, and Jack's protection. Her inner strength was growing, challenging the storm raging outside. The sounds of battle echoing through the dark forest approached the cabin like a storm, while fear and determination danced together inside Julia. She was at the most critical moment of her life. Not only did she have to protect herself, but also the future of the baby she carried. There was no turning back now. Jack, Michael, and Emily did everything they could to push the attackers back. Worn between exhaustion, pain, and anger, they saw just how determined and ruthless their enemies were. But Jack's tough, calm demeanor kept the group's spirit alive. "We'll stand our ground," he said with conviction. "They'll come to the end, and so will we." Inside the cabin, Julia stood with her baby, who had grown stronger after birth. The warmth from the fire filled the room as Emily quietly approached her. "I don't understand you," Julia said, eyes filled with mixed emotions. "Why do you want to help?" Traces of old wounds and regrets showed on Emily's face. "Because I couldn't protect you in my past. This time, I can change that. For the future of this baby." After hours of fighting, the enemies began to withdraw. But the silence was only a temporary breath. Watching the dark shadows outside, Jack said, "A bigger storm is coming. They'll be back. Stronger, more prepared." Julia stood up to gather her strength. "No matter how strong they are, we're stronger too. Because now we're fighting not just for ourselves, but for a life." At that moment, the quiet power inside her washed over her whole being. She was no longer afraid. Days later, everyone in the village was talking. Julia and Jack's fight had turned into a legend whispered from ear to ear. Old prejudices had broken down, and people began to see them differently. Julia, with her baby, was slowly getting used to her new life. She was no longer just a fugitive, but also a protective mother. As Emily quietly left the cabin, she knew the seeds of friendship and loyalty she left behind would grow. Michael stayed by Jack's side, a symbol of their friendship and struggle. And Jack, that old, lonely man, had finally found a real family, a real hope. By the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment, or just forget to hit the button. But your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel.